There is a number right now that sits at the center of every military calculation being made in Washington, Jerusalem, and Tehran. It is not a casualty count. It is not a dollar figure. It is not the number of fighter jets in the sky or warships in the Persian Gulf. It is the number of missile interceptors Israel has left in storage facilities scattered across the country, and that number is shrinking every single day. Since February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched a joint surprise attack on Iran that took out Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei on the very first day, Iran has been firing ballistic missiles at Israeli cities in wave after wave of retaliatory strikes, multiple salvos a day, every single day. And every time one of those missiles screams across the sky toward Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Eilat, Israel has to fire an interceptor to stop it. Each interception costs millions. Each interception removes one more round from a stockpile that cannot be refilled fast enough. And here's where this gets truly unsettling. According to U.S. officials who spoke to the news outlet Semafor, Israel told Washington this month that it is running critically low on ballistic missile interceptors. Not low in a way that can be quietly managed. Critically low. The kind of low where the math starts working against you and you cannot make it stop. The IDF came out and denied it, calling the report inaccurate, saying they are prepared for a prolonged conflict. But here is the thing that denial cannot explain away. Hours after that report dropped, the Israeli government held an emergency vote at midnight on a Saturday and approved $826 million in urgent defense procurement. You do not scramble $826 million in the middle of the night if everything is fine. But what makes this situation unlike anything we have seen before is a detail that changes the entire strategic picture. Iran is not just firing missiles. Iran appears to be managing the rate at which it fires them, calibrating the volume, watching the math. And if Iran has even a rough idea of how many interceptors Israel has left, which multiple intelligence assessments suggest it does, then Iran is not just attacking Israel, it is running a countdown, and the number at the end of that countdown is 0. To understand why running out of interceptors is not just a military inconvenience but an existential crisis, you need to understand what those interceptors actually do. Because when people hear about missile defense, they picture some vague technological shield hovering over a country, something abstract, something in the background. That is not what this is. What Israel operates is the most advanced layered missile defense architecture any nation on Earth has ever built. And every layer of it is burning through ammunition right now. The first layer is Iron Dome. This is the system most people have seen in news footage. The streaks of light racing across the night sky over Israeli cities, intercepting rockets and short-range threats before they hit the ground. Iron Dome handles the low-altitude stuff, the rockets from Hezbollah in Lebanon, the short-range projectiles that travel relatively short distances. It is remarkably effective, and it has saved thousands of lives. But Iron Dome was never designed to stop what Iran is sending. The second layer is David's Sling. This system handles the medium-range ballistic missiles, the threats that travel further and faster than what Iron Dome can reach. Syrian missiles, medium-range Iranian projectiles, the category of weapon that sits in the gap between short-range rockets and the big intercontinental threats. David's Sling fills that gap. Each interceptor costs roughly $1 million. The third layer, and this is the critical one in the current war, is the Arrow system, Arrow 2 and Arrow 3. These interceptors operate in the upper atmosphere and in space. They are designed to take down long-range ballistic missiles, the kind Iran fires directly from its own territory. Missiles that travel over 1,000 kilometers at speeds that give Israel roughly 10 minutes of warning. Arrow 3 is an exoatmospheric interceptor, meaning it destroys incoming missiles in space before they even re-enter the atmosphere. Each Arrow interceptor costs somewhere between $2 and $4 million. Some estimates go higher, and the production timeline for a single Arrow interceptor is not weeks, it is months, potentially over a year from component manufacturing to final assembly and testing. 3 layers, 3 different categories of threat, all 3 under strain simultaneously. Because Iran is not just firing one type of missile, Iran is firing all of them. Short range, medium range, long range. Ballistic missiles with conventional warheads. Ballistic missiles loaded with cluster munitions that scatter dozens of explosive submunitions across a 10-kilometer radius. Drones from multiple directions. And Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in Lebanon, joined the fight on March 2nd and has been launching hundreds of rockets a day on top of everything Iran is already sending. Every single one of those threats requires an interceptor, and every interceptor fired is one that cannot be replaced in time. Here is what separates this conflict from every previous engagement Israel has faced. Iran is not trying to overwhelm the defense system in one massive strike. That is what people expect. That is what makes for dramatic headlines. 1,000 missiles in a single night. An all-out blitz designed to saturate the defenses and punch through with sheer volume. Iran tried versions of that approach before, in April 2024, in June 2025 during the 12-day war. And while those attacks were dangerous, they were also concentrated events that the defense system could absorb and recover from. What Iran is doing now is fundamentally different. Iran is running an arithmetic campaign. A slow, deliberate, mathematically precise operation designed not to destroy Israeli cities in one blow, but to drain the defensive system protecting those cities until the system has nothing left to fire. Think of it like this. If someone throws 100 punches at you all at once, you can block most of them and survive the ones that get through. But if someone throws 10 punches a day, every day, for weeks, and you have a limited number of blocks before your arms give out, eventually the math catches up. That is what Iran is doing. 10 waves of attacks per day on average since the fourth day of the war. Some days more, some days fewer, but consistent, relentless, calibrated. And here's the detail that makes the arithmetic devastating. The cost ratio is completely lopsided. An Iranian Shahab-class ballistic missile costs a fraction of what an Arrow interceptor costs to build. Iran fires a missile. Israel fires an interceptor worth millions. Iran spends relatively little. Israel spends an enormous amount. And this exchange repeats every single day, multiple times a day. Even a third grader who understands subtraction can see where that math leads. But it gets worse. Iran started adding cluster munitions to its ballistic missiles, cluster warheads that scatter dozens of explosive submunitions across a wide area when the missile reaches its target zone. This is a weapon banned by international treaty, signed by over 100 nations. Iran did not sign that treaty, and the effect on Israel's defense calculus is brutal. A single incoming missile with cluster munitions does not just require one interceptor. It requires the system to engage more aggressively because the consequences of a miss are spread across kilometers instead of a single impact point. By the 10th day of the war, Iran had fired roughly 300 missiles at Israel. Nearly half of them carried cluster submunitions. That is not random escalation. That is a calculated decision to accelerate the rate at which Israel burns through its interceptor stockpile. And there is another layer to this arithmetic that rarely gets discussed. Iran is not firing at random times or random locations. The attack pattern data compiled by the Alma Research Center shows that since the fourth day of the war, Iran has averaged roughly 10 waves of missile attacks per day against Israel. The geographic distribution is deliberate. 40% of all attack waves have targeted the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, the economic heart of the country. 23% aimed at the north, 21% at the south, 15% at Jerusalem. Iran is spreading the threat across all regions, forcing Israel to maintain defensive coverage everywhere simultaneously, making it impossible to concentrate remaining interceptors in any single area without exposing another. And no missile defense system works at 100%. The Arrow system has a reported intercept success rate of around 90%, which sounds excellent until you do the math on what 10% failure looks like over 3 weeks of sustained fire. 1 missile in 10 gets through on average. Against the volume Iran has been sustaining, that means missiles are landing in Israeli cities, not every day, but enough. The strike on Beit Shemesh killed 9 people when a missile hit a synagogue shelter, despite interceptors being fired against it. 12 Israeli civilians have been killed since the war began. Over 2,700 have been injured. The defense system is performing remarkably well, but remarkably well is not the same as infinite. And Iran is not trying to beat the system's accuracy. Iran is trying to outlast its supply. On Saturday, March 14th, the Semafor report landed like a bomb of its own. U.S. officials, speaking on condition of anonymity, confirmed that Israel had informed Washington earlier that week that its ballistic missile interceptor stockpile had reached critically low levels. The report noted that Israel had entered this war already depleted. The 12-day war with Iran in June 2025 had burned through a massive number of interceptors. Roughly 200 ballistic missile interceptors, including Arrow and U.S. THAAD rounds, were fired during that conflict at a combined cost exceeding $1 billion. And the production capacity to replace them does not operate on wartime timelines. It operates on peacetime manufacturing schedules that measure output in single digits per month, not hundreds. The IDF responded within hours. Official denial. A military source told reporters there was no interceptor shortage, that they had prepared for a prolonged campaign, that they were monitoring the situation constantly. Israel Hayom, a major Israeli newspaper, went further, calling the Semafor report a complete fabrication and suggesting it may have originated from Iranian disinformation. 3 Israeli officials told the outlet that the IDF has sufficient interceptors of all types and that production is being continuously replenished through round-the-clock operations at defense industry facilities. And then, in the middle of that same night, the Israeli government held an emergency vote by phone and approved the transfer of 2.6 billion shekels, roughly $826 million, to the Defense Ministry for what they called urgent and essential defense procurement. The money was pulled from other ministry budgets and interest payment allocations. The vote happened late Saturday night, not during normal working hours, not as part of a scheduled budget process, as an emergency. Now, denials in wartime are expected. Every military in the history of conflict has denied shortages, vulnerabilities, and setbacks, while simultaneously scrambling behind the scenes to address them. The denial is part of the strategy. You do not announce to your enemy that you are running low on the one thing keeping their missiles from landing. But the midnight spending authorization tells a story the denial cannot overwrite. $826 million does not get approved at midnight on a weekend because everything is going according to plan. That money is the sound of a government racing to stay ahead of arithmetic that is working against it. To understand what happens when missile defense starts failing, you do not need to imagine a hypothetical. You just need to look at Beit Shemesh, a city of roughly 150,000 people, 18 miles from Jerusalem. On the day after the war's opening, strikes took out Khamenei. Iran launched a retaliatory barrage. A missile came in aimed at the Beit Shemesh area. At least 2 interceptors were fired against it. They did not stop it. The missile struck a communal shelter inside a synagogue. 9 people were killed, dozens were injured. It was the single deadliest incident of the entire conflict so far. That one event demonstrated something that no amount of public reassurance can undo. The system is not perfect. It was never designed to be perfect. Israeli military officials have said repeatedly that the defense system is not hermetic. That word hermetic, meaning completely sealed, airtight, impenetrable, is the word they use to manage expectations. But expectations and reality collide differently when you are the person sitting in the shelter that gets hit. The behavioral consequences of declining interceptor reliability are not gradual. They are sudden and cascading. When Iron Dome intercepts a rocket over Tel Aviv, the people below see the flash, hear the boom, and go back to their lives. They trust the system. That trust is the foundation of every decision Israeli civilians make during wartime. The decision to send children to school, the decision to keep a business open, the decision to stay in the country rather than leave. When that trust fractures, when people start believing the system might not catch the next one, everything shifts. Schools that stayed open during the first days of the conflict started closing. Israel restricted public gatherings, including at the Western Wall during Ramadan. The Home Front Command designated certain areas as lower risk and allowed schools to reopen there. But other cities like Ashkelon, Ariel, and Dimona decided conditions were still not suitable. Businesses shuttered. The economic activity that continued through the early weeks of this war because people trusted the shield above them started to freeze. Not because more missiles were hitting targets, but because the knowledge that the shield might be thinning changed how every single person calculated their own risk. And here's the part that connects the civilian story to the military one. Every Israeli Air Force sortie into Iranian airspace, every strike on Iranian targets, every offensive operation the IDF conducts is premised on the assumption that the home front is protected. Pilots flying missions over Iran are not just thinking about the target in front of them, they are thinking about whether their families back home are safe. Commanders planning 3 more weeks of operations, which is what the IDF has publicly said it needs, are planning on the assumption that the interceptor supply can sustain 3 more weeks of Iranian fire. If that assumption starts to crack, the entire offensive calculus changes. Do you keep hitting Iran while your own cities lose their shield? Or do you slow the offensive to manage the political and human reality at home? Iran designed that dilemma deliberately, and Israel is living inside it right now. When the interceptor shortage report went public, the American response was carefully constructed to project confidence without actually answering the question everyone was asking. The Pentagon's chief spokesman said the department has everything it needs to execute any mission at the time and place of the president's choosing. The White House press secretary said U.S. stockpiles are more than enough to achieve Trump's goals against Iran and beyond. The U.S. official who spoke to Semafor emphasized that America itself is not running low on interceptors. Read those statements again carefully. Every single one of them is about American capability, not Israeli capability. The Pentagon said it can execute its missions. The White House said U.S. stockpiles are sufficient for U.S. goals. The U.S. official drew a clear line between American reserves and Israeli reserves. Nobody in Washington said Israel has enough interceptors. Nobody said the Israeli stockpile is adequate. Nobody addressed the specific question of how long Israel's defense can sustain the current rate of fire. That silence is the answer, and here is the number that gives that silence its weight. During the 12-day war in June 2025, the United States fired more than 150 THAAD interceptors to help defend Israel. 150 rounds from America's own terminal high-altitude area defense system. That represented roughly 14% of the entire U.S. THAAD interceptor inventory, and according to analysis from the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, replenishing those 150 interceptors at current production rates would take somewhere between 3 and 8 years. The U.S. acquires roughly 11 to 18 THAAD interceptors per year. They burned through more than a year's worth of production in 12 days, and that was last summer's war. This war has already lasted longer with no clear endpoint. The production bottleneck is not about money. Congress can authorize billions in defense spending, and it will not change the number of interceptors rolling off the production line next month. The bottleneck is manufacturing capacity, precision components, kill vehicles, guidance systems, solid rocket motors. Each of these has a production timeline measured in months, not weeks. Accelerating that capacity requires procurement adjustments, supply chain realignment, workforce expansion, and congressional authorization that unfolds on timelines measured in quarters, not days. America told Israel it is assessing production capacity increases. Assessing, not producing. And the distance between assessing and producing is measured in the same unit as the distance between Israel's current stockpile and zero: time. What is happening to Israel's interceptor stockpile is not a local event. It is a global stress test being watched in real time by every military power on the planet, and the conclusions being drawn are reshaping defense calculations from Brussels to Beijing. 14 NATO member nations operate Patriot missile defense systems. Several Eastern European members operate compatible defensive architecture designed to protect against the exact kind of threat that Russia could one day pose. Every single one of those nations is watching Israel's interceptor countdown and running the same math against their own inventories. If a sustained, calibrated missile campaign can drain the most sophisticated layered defense system any country has ever built, what does that same strategy look like against smaller national stockpiles with longer resupply timelines and less sophisticated systems? The answer NATO defense ministers are arriving at is not a comfortable one. Germany has invested roughly $6.5 billion in the Arrow 3 system as part of the European Sky Shield initiative. The first elements of that system were activated at Holzdorf Air Base in December 2025. And now, barely 3 months later, Germany is watching the system it just bought get stress tested under sustained combat conditions against exactly the threat it was purchased to defend against. Every performance data point coming out of this conflict feeds directly into German defense planning. Every interceptor Israel fires is a data point about consumption rates that Germany's defense ministry is plugging into its own models. Trump, meanwhile, used the crisis to pressure NATO allies. In an interview with the Financial Times, he warned that a failure to help secure the Strait of Hormuz would be very bad for the future of NATO. Germany responded with skepticism, signaling it would not participate in the proposed naval mission. No NATO ally publicly committed warships. The alliance that is supposed to underpin collective Western defense is fracturing over the question of who bears the cost when American military commitments drain shared resources. And then there are the adversaries. 11 countries have reached out to Ukraine for help countering Shahed-type drones, the same Iranian drone design being used in this conflict. Russia has spent decades developing saturation tactics against American and NATO missile defense systems. The specific approach Iran is executing, calibrated daily volumes designed to deplete rather than overwhelm, targeting all defensive layers simultaneously, is consistent with doctrinal approaches Russia has been developing theoretically for years. Russia is watching Iran field test a strategy Russia has been planning on paper. Every day this war continues, Russia collects empirical data about the consumption rates, failure points, and logistical constraints of Western missile defense that no wargame simulation could ever provide. China operates its own ballistic missile defense systems. And while Beijing issued no public statement about the interceptor shortage, the implications are impossible to ignore. Every nation with offensive missile capability is learning the same lesson from this conflict. You do not need to build a missile that can defeat the defense system. You just need to fire enough missiles to empty it. The defense is finite, the offense is cheaper, and time is on the side of whoever has more ammunition to spend. And it is not just Israel absorbing the blows. Iran's retaliatory strikes have hit countries across the entire Gulf region. Bahrain, home to the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, has intercepted over 125 missiles and 211 drones since the war began. A hotel, a refinery, and a water desalination plant were struck. Dubai International Airport was shut down after a drone strike set a fuel tank on fire. Saudi Arabia has been intercepting drones over Riyadh. The United Arab Emirates has dealt with nearly 1,900 missiles and drones. Iran is not just fighting Israel, it is punishing every country in the region that hosts American military assets. And every one of those countries is now asking the same question Israel is asking: how long can the interceptors last? Here's where this all converges into a single, inescapable reality. The IDF has publicly stated that it needs at least 3 more weeks of offensive operations to systematically degrade Iran's defense industry and military infrastructure. 3 more weeks. That means 3 more weeks of Iranian retaliatory fire, 3 more weeks of interceptors being consumed, 3 more weeks of the stockpile shrinking. Iran's missile output has dropped dramatically since the opening days. By day 10, missile and drone attacks had fallen by more than 90% compared to the initial barrages. US and Israeli strikes have destroyed a significant portion of Iran's launch infrastructure, missile storage sites, and production facilities. That suppression effort is working, but working does not mean finished. Iran continues to fire multiple salvos per day. The attacks have not stopped. They have slowed. And even at a reduced rate, each salvo still costs Israel interceptors it cannot replace fast enough. The Iranian foreign minister has publicly stated that Tehran is not seeking a ceasefire. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has vowed to pursue and eliminate the Israeli prime minister. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who was elected on March 8th to replace his father, has not been seen in public since being reportedly wounded in the war's opening strikes. The Iranian regime is damaged, cornered, and showing no signs of backing down, which means the missiles keep coming and the interceptor count keeps dropping. Trump has described the conflict as a short-term excursion and suggested it could end soon, but he has also said it will last as long as necessary. The IDF says it has thousands of targets remaining. Iran says it is ready for a long fight. None of those statements point to a rapid conclusion, and every day the war continues, the most important number in the entire conflict ticks closer to a threshold that changes everything. That number, the exact count of interceptors remaining in Israeli storage facilities, is classified. It sits on desks in the Pentagon, in the Israeli Defense Ministry, in the National Security Council. It is not in any public statement, and it will not be, because the moment that number becomes known, it changes the behavior of every actor in this conflict simultaneously. Iran adjusts its firing rate to guarantee depletion before resupply arrives. Israel faces impossible pressure to either escalate decisively before the window closes or accept terms it would never agree to under normal circumstances. America confronts a political crisis about the adequacy of its alliance commitments, and every adversary watching from outside this war updates its assessment of what American security guarantees are actually worth. The number is hidden because countdowns are the most dangerous information in an active war. Everyone who knows how much time is left on the clock makes different decisions than they would if the clock were invisible. And right now, somewhere in an Iranian operational planning room, an analyst is looking at an estimate of that number and treating it as the single most important variable in the entire conflict. Not the carrier groups, not the oil prices, not the diplomatic back channels, the number of Arrow interceptors left in Israeli bunkers. That number determines when this war enters its final and most dangerous phase. It was smaller this morning than it was yesterday. It will be smaller tomorrow than it is today. The countdown is running. Iran is watching it. And 9 million people are living under a shield that gets thinner every time another salvo launches from Iranian territory towards cities that have nowhere left to look but up. This is what a war of attrition looks like in the age of missile defense. Not trenches and barbed wire. Not tank columns grinding through mud. A spreadsheet. A production schedule. A countdown measured in interceptors consumed versus interceptors produced. Iran turned basic subtraction into a strategic weapon. And the most technologically advanced defense system ever created is discovering that technology without supply is just hardware waiting to become irrelevant. The question is no longer whether the system works. It does. The question is whether the system lasts. And that question has a specific classified numerical answer that gets smaller every single day this war continues. The countdown does not pause, the factories do not speed up, and the missiles keep coming.